Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank all members for your comments and suggestions and for supporting the support measures that we have put in place during the heightened alert period. Several members have asked about COVID-related management measures. In fact, we had an extensive discussion on this yesterday, so I do not really want to add much to this, but I do want to address briefly points made by several members about the abrupt and sudden changes that we've all had to experience these past few weeks. Actually, I thought we had explained it yesterday, but I think it bears repeating. From the start of this pandemic, we have been upfront, transparent with Singaporeans about the challenges we face, about our assessment of the situation, and sought to communicate that as best as we can. Obviously, it's very hard to predict what will happen. I mean, we don't even know what will happen in the next few days, let alone the next few weeks or months. So everyone needs to understand that we are operating in a highly fluid and rapidly changing and very uncertain environment. Just think about this. In the lead up to where we are today in early July, what were the cases like? Single digit. And it was coming down. 11 July, 0 cases for the first time in quite a long while. Any risk dashboard would tell you things are okay, and we would be able to move forward to open confidently. Then what struck? We had the KTV cluster. No warning, no early indicator, but it struck us. But based on our assessment of the KTV cluster then, we felt it was still possible to proceed, but perhaps slow down the pace of opening. And therefore, we put in place the 5-2 rule, which we talked about yesterday. But shortly after that, we had the Jurong Fishery Port cluster. And our assessment of that cluster, that this was much, much more serious. The cases were already in the community through our markets, our hawker centers. There was heightened risk of exponential spread, and our vaccine coverage at that time was not adequate. And that's why we decided at that time that we had to return to phase 2 heightened alert. I think if you look at the facts today, I am fully convinced that that was the right judgment call. Look at where we are today. Up to now, the KTV cluster has had 245 cases, including 2 cases today. The Jurong Fishery Port cluster has had 902 cases, including 36 today. That's about 4 times the size of the KTV cluster, and it is still growing. Let's look at the cases of hospitalization and those who are very ill, because as we said, that's also an important indicator. And that has gone up by 3.5 times in the past week alone, from 5 in July, yes, it's a low base, from 5 in July to 18 yesterday. If we had not done the heightened alert, the outcomes would have been far worse. Remember, we still have 200,000 seniors above 60 who are not vaccinated. Are we prepared to live with an outcome where many of them fall sick and even succumb to the illness? Is that something we want to see happen in Singapore? So it is a very difficult decision, we understand. I know everyone is frustrated about the measures. Sure, the minute I announce something, I get it on my inbox already. I fully understand, but I hope members in this House understand too. We've tried very hard to explain to all of you in the hope that you too understand what an important, difficult, but necessary decision this has to be, so that you too can do your part as responsible members of Parliament in a crisis and pandemic like this, to explain to your residents, to your constituents, who, yes, I understand, are frustrated, are upset, explain why we had to do this. Difficult, but necessary. And as I said yesterday, we will monitor the situation. We know that hospitalization and ICU happens with a lag, so we'll see what happens in the next few days with the ICU cases and the cases of those who are severely ill. We will look at and see if we can continue to keep the cases under control. Fortunately, as of now, it doesn't look, case numbers are still high, but it doesn't look like the numbers are rising exponentially. And so if the overall situation, as I said yesterday, cases, clusters under control, hospitalization rates, ICU rates remain acceptable and stable, at the midterm of our heightened alert, which is coming soon, we will review and we will consider some easing for vaccinated persons only. And then I mentioned the next milestone comes in September, when we will reach 80% of people in Singapore receiving 2 doses, and hopefully similar coverage for our seniors aged 70 and above, and then we can make the next move of easing. So that's already revealing some sense of what roadmap one can expect. It's not all the details because we are still fleshing out details around specific measures and potentially next steps after September. And as I said, when we are ready, when we have more information, we will certainly share this with Singaporeans, recognizing that as we open up with a higher vaccination coverage, our focus will change and we will shift our focus, not just looking at daily infection cases, but paying more attention to those who are hospitalized and in ICU. That would be the more salient consideration. And based on that shift, hopefully then, if we see more cases rising, emerging as we open, we can have some confidence. So long as hospitalization and ICU cases remain stable, we can have some confidence that we hopefully will not have to go back to heightened alerts again. So long as I said, important qualifier, so long as hospitalization and ICU cases remain stable and acceptable at an acceptable level. But we know that we cannot rule out things from worsening. We know that we cannot rule out the risk of new variants coming, that you may have a more severe outbreak, more people hospitalized, and therefore we have to be prepared. We may have to put in additional restrictions down the road. Hopefully, not like what we had gone through over these past few weeks and months, but that's the uncertainty that we all have to face, and we all should face it together, recognizing that this is a collective, this is something we all have to deal with during this pandemic. I would certainly not like to have to impose restrictions again if I can help it. But if the situation worsens to such an extent where hospitalization and ICU cases go up, I think despite our high vaccine coverage, perhaps because of a new variant, then I think we have to understand these are the risks and why we may have to put in place such measures. So I hope this explanation will give everyone a better sense of understanding, appreciation of why we did what we did, and what to expect. We have shared as much as we can up to now, and as I said, when further details are ready, we will share more. Many of you also have suggestions on other COVID-related sort of measures that you think might be adjusted, and I want to assure you that the MTF will continue to study all these suggestions carefully as we review and update our strategies. Several members offered suggestions in other areas like childcare and workplace fairness. These will require careful study by the relevant ministries and will be considered and addressed on other occasions, so I don't propose to dwell too much on them. In my response today, I would like to touch on 2 broad areas that members have raised. First, how we are helping workers and businesses to ride through this period of heightened alert. And second, how we are preparing for the next phase and gearing up for a post-pandemic world. Let me start with the immediate support that we are giving. Our support measures, as all of you know, will cost more than $2 billion throughout this heightened alert period since May. Essentially, we have tried to reallocate as much as we can from the existing budget to avail funds for the support measures. And based on the amount available for spending, we then had to carefully design the measures to meet the needs of businesses and workers who are most affected. We also took into consideration the strong base of existing measures that have already been rolled out in previous budgets and which are still in place today. They include the wage credit scheme, which continues to support businesses who provide wage increases to their Singaporean workers, the SMEs Go Digital program, and the SG United Jobs and Skills package. All of these schemes, programs, measures already part of the baseline, part of the existing support, and the vast majority of the support, in fact, goes to SMEs. There is also existing support for specific areas like the arts and sports sector, which Mr. Shahrial Taha, Mr. Mark Che, and Ms. Raeesah Khan spoke about. For example, sports coaches and fitness instructors can benefit from the continuing coach education training allowance and the self-employed person project grant. Likewise, we have similar support scheme for arts and culture, freelancers and organizations. Where access to credit is concerned, we had earlier extended measures like the temporary bridging loan program and the extended support scheme standardized to enable SMEs in affected sectors to defer principal payments on their eligible loans. I heard just now suggestions from Mr. Don Wee and Mr. Edward Chia to enhance some of these schemes and to extend the moratoriums for the loan schemes. For now, the MAS and our economic agencies assess that the credit market remains healthy and the current support measures are sufficient. But we will continue to monitor the situation closely and we will review the need for any adjustments. Meanwhile, our local banks are proactively reaching out to SMEs to provide relief and restructuring support based on their circumstances. I also recognize that cash flow is a major concern for many SMEs, and several members highlighted this. I think Ms. Hertingru, Mr. Edward Chia, and others. So we will strive to push out the support as fast as we can. We will do so within our operational limits while ensuring accuracy and good governance. In fact, government assistance is now flowing such that there is cash flow support to businesses throughout the year. To illustrate, eligible firms have been receiving quarterly job support scheme payouts, JSS payouts, since April last year, with the most recent paid in June. And the cash payout under the rental support scheme will be paid out soon in August, before the next JSS payout in September. So we try to ensure a steady stream of cash payouts to businesses. There may be businesses or workers who do not meet the qualifying criteria of some of our schemes. And that's why we have the COVID-19 Recovery Grant Temporary to cater to individuals who may not fit into any of our schemes. So, for example, hawkers in coffee shops, they may not qualify for the Market and Hawker Relief Fund, but they can apply for the COVID-19 Temporary Recovery Grant Temporary, and we will help them through that avenue. We are also helping these hawkers through rental rebates, to get on board or to support them through the online delivery platforms and many other ways. Likewise, we also consider businesses who are badly affected but may not fall neatly into specified SSIC codes, because these are the codes we use to determine which category the business is in, and then we would disburse the JSS payouts. The codes may not accurately reflect the kinds of business activities that the firm is involved in. So since the inception of the job support scheme, we do consider appeals from businesses. In fact, we have extended JSS support for close to 6,000 companies through such appeals. And companies that many members talked about, those who are suppliers, vendors to F&B, retail, event companies doing local events, all of these, if they appeal, have been successful. So if you know of such cases, you can let MOF know. You can appeal through IRAS, and we will look at each case on its own merit. Likewise, agencies do exercise flexibility in the implementation of the different schemes. With regard to the COVID-19 recovery grant, for example, Ms. Jessica Tan and Mr. Shahrial Taha asked about more flexibility for those with extenuating circumstances, flexibility around the income loss or AV criteria. And again, agencies will look at each case and consider it on a case-by-case basis. On rental relief, I recognize the difficult issues faced by landlords and tenants, as Ms. Jessica Tan highlighted. I mentioned this in my statement yesterday, and perhaps it's worth repeating the principles for intervention. The starting point is the sanctity of contract. We do not lightly intervene, and we do so only in specific situations and in a carefully scoped manner. This is also in line with Mr. Cheng Sing Yao's caution that we should not create the impression that such interventions are now becoming the norm. So the Ministry of Law is carefully considering the eligibility criteria and details of the framework, which they will announce in due course. Ultimately, landlords and tenants have a symbiotic relationship where both parties do well or conversely do poorly together. So it's important to keep lines of communication open to ensure constructive discussions. And that's why we now have the Fair Tenancy Industry Committee that facilitates this by bringing together key representatives from Singapore's landlord and tenant communities to discuss issues related to retail lease agreements. Several members, including Ms. Janet Ang, Mr. Edward Chia, Mr. Don Yeo, had suggestions on quite a wide range of measures. We will study these options for future support if necessary. But as many have also highlighted, the best way to help our businesses is to allow them to resume their operations and get their top line back again. And that remains our priority. When we do so, and when we start to reopen our economy, reopen our borders, the manpower inflow will also resume. This will then address concerns about acute labor shortages in sectors like construction, marine, and process. I think a point that Ms. Janet Ang and Mr. Melvin Yong highlighted. Meanwhile, as these members have noted, we have started several pilots to bring in migrant workers who will adhere to strict testing protocols in their home countries, and then we bring them in safely. And we will explore expanding these pilots to facilitate worker inflow in a safe manner. But Mr. Melvin Yong asked about numbers. I don't have any concrete numbers with me, but obviously the numbers are not going to be very large at this stage. It will take time to do this in a safe and sustainable manner. And that's why, to Associate Professor James Lim's question, it's not possible to do these projects this year. It's not because of financial issues, it's not because of money and then we can borrow and therefore do these projects. It's just that the firms will not have workers. And we do not want to rush to bring in workers and then end up with a large outbreak again. We have to do this safely. And so if we were to do this safely, it has to be done gradually in a controlled manner, making sure that the pilots work first before we can scale up progressively. And that's why our assessment is that these projects cannot be done this year and have to be deferred next year. Ultimately, no one can predict the trajectory of this pandemic. As I said just now, if we continue on our path of reopening, hopefully we can continue it in a continuous manner. But I can't rule out the possibility of occasional slowdowns or even pullbacks. And if we do so, then we have to introduce additional restrictions, and at that stage, we will have to put in place another package to support businesses. If we have to do that, then we will need to find ways to fund such a package. But as Mr. Liang Eng Hua noted, it's becoming harder and harder to do so. You have to squeeze out the next drop of funding. It's not easy. Already with this round, agencies have reviewed their development projects. Due to COVID-19 delays, as I said, it's not possible to do it this year because of manpower shortage. So those delays of project have allowed us to reallocate resources for the current support measures. If we have to provide additional support later in this fiscal year, we will likely need to tighten government spending across both operating and development expenditures to free up resources for such contingency needs. So that's what we would do if we had to do another package within this financial year. Mr. Liang suggested setting up a pandemic economic response fund so you don't have to come to Parliament each time there is a support package. And Mr. Louis Chua, I think, also mentioned something similar with the idea of automatic stabilizers. It may be challenging to set up such a fund this year because we will not have the resources to do so. But it is an idea we can study for the next budget. If we do set up such a fund, we will have to strike the right balance to ensure that Parliament continues to have oversight over the relief measures. Of course, we cannot rule out the possibility that the situation may significantly worsen. And if we were in such a serious and emergency condition, as I said before, we will not hesitate to draw on the full fiscal firepower of our reserves, and we will seek the President's support to do so. Besides dealing with the immediate challenges, we must prepare for the next phase. Life in a post-pandemic world will be different from what it used to be, and we must expect greater uncertainty and volatility. So we must continue this important work of transforming our economy and equipping our people with the skills they need in an age of change. So as we transition to this new normal, we must go beyond support measures toward building strength and resilience for the future. We must continue to invest in growing our economy, strengthening our society, and greening our home. So let me elaborate on each of these areas. Our first priority is to expand opportunities and create good jobs for Singaporeans. And to do so, we need a strong and vibrant economy. This will enable us to provide a high quality of life for all Singaporeans and enable them to achieve their aspirations. As a small and open economy, rapid shifts in the external environment have profound implications for Singapore, and COVID-19 has brought this out acutely. Countries have moved to reshore production activities. Industries and firms have accelerated the restructuring of their supply chains to reduce concentration risk. Remote working is becoming the new norm, so reducing the importance of geographical factors in where companies choose to locate. At the same time, fiscal stresses have led to the emerging consensus on a global minimum effective tax rate, which we discussed. And this outcome will blunt our tax incentives to anchor significant economic activities in Singapore. So all of these trends can erode our value proposition as a hub economy. I recently attended the G20 finance ministers meeting in Venice. And being in Venice, I was reminded of how a city's fortunes can easily change. Venice enjoyed great prosperity in the Middle Ages. It was a vital trading hub, connecting the East with the West via the Mediterranean. But Venice did not adapt fast enough to changes in the world. The invention of the seafaring galleon, which could survive at sea for months, even years, meant that European states could set up new oceanic trade routes bypassing Venice altogether. And this marked the beginning of the decline of Venice. What happened to Venice can happen to Singapore too, if we are not careful. So we must never take our hub status for granted. We must continue to stay open and double down on our connectivity as a trusted hub for commerce, trade, and talent. And that's why we thought that it was very important that we have a debate on the issue of FTA not too long ago. We must continually work hard to strengthen our value proposition as the gateway to Asia and the world. Across industries too, rapid technological change is bringing about new waves of disruption. As the global economy recovers, we are seeing increased levels of activities, startup and company formation around the world, powered by new innovation and ideas. And we see this happening in Singapore too, I think a point that Mr. Leon Pereira highlighted just now. We will strive to anchor and nurture more of such activities in Singapore. Likewise, existing companies must be prepared to rethink their business models, strive for new horizons, and push the technology frontier. And that's why we are systematically refreshing all 23 of our industry transformation maps, or ITMs, to spur restructuring and transformation and to develop new growth areas. Take the example of the aerospace industry. It's been badly hit by the pandemic, but at some point, demand will return and the industry will recover. However, at that time, the future of the industry may be different. For example, we are seeing a shift towards sustainable aviation fuels. In the longer term, we could even see the emergence of hydrogen-powered aircraft. Digital services which leverage aircraft data to create new services like fuel optimization and aircraft health monitoring are also emerging. Now, we start from a position of strength with an established base of engine maintenance, repair, and operations, or MRO activities in Singapore. But we cannot assume that this lead is going to be with us forever. We must actively pursue opportunities to anchor global centers of excellence with new technologies to ensure we remain a global node for aerospace MRO and manufacturing activities. And at the same time, we must help our local Singapore firms, our SMEs, to grow and build new capabilities, to partner the MNCs so that together we can have a vibrant aerospace ecosystem. This process of restructuring and transformation is vital to keeping our economy vibrant and strong. And so the focus of our support measures will, over time, shift from providing pain relief, as we are now, to building deep capabilities for companies to innovate and transform. And to do this, we have a suite of capability development schemes administered by the Enterprise Singapore. I recognize some of you have said, some members have said that the schemes can be overwhelming, difficult to navigate. The process for administration can be cumbersome. I want to assure members that Enterprise Singapore takes all these feedback and suggestions seriously. They are continuing to improve. For example, we have SME centers, we have the business grant portal, and they will continue to look at the suggestions that members have given to see how we can strengthen our SME sector and help even more of them scale up to new markets overseas. Just as our firms are transforming, we must also envision jobs of the future. And I think many MPs spoke on this, including the Labour MPs, and I thank all of you for your suggestions. And that's why our ITMs are complemented by jobs transformation maps. They help to equip our workers with the relevant skills to take on new jobs as their firms and industries transform. So we work closely with our institutes of higher learning to ensure that fresh graduates from ITEs, polytechnics, and universities are equipped with these skills. And we pay special attention to mid-careers, especially those in their mid-40s and 50s, as we recognize that it is harder for them to find jobs if they are displaced. And that's why we work closely with employers and unions on training, reskilling, upskilling, and career conversion opportunities for this group. Through the SG United Jobs and Skills Package, we have provided many opportunities for job seekers over the past year. I understand the concern amongst those in temporary jobs because they're worried that once COVID is over, they may not have jobs. So as our economy recovers, there will be increased demand for workers and more jobs will be created. We are monitoring this carefully to ensure that those in temporary jobs now will be emplaced into permanent positions. One tangible help that the government provides for this is the Jobs Growth Incentive, which has supported employers to expand their local hiring. Ms. Fumiha mentioned the good outcomes of this scheme in her speech. The scheme runs until September this year, and we are reviewing its extension. So in sum, Singapore will never be a large market or the cheapest place to do business. But what has made Singapore an attractive value proposition for investors is our overall system's competitiveness, rule of law, strong intellectual property protection, connectivity to regional and global markets, an innovative and skilled workforce, and importantly, the strong spirit of tripartite partnership between the government, unions, and employers. We will continue to strengthen all of these factors to ensure we build a stronger and more vibrant economy. Second, we will also build a fairer and more inclusive society because we want to progress not individually or for our own families, but for all in our larger Singapore family. COVID-19 has deepened existing social inequalities on a global scale. Across the world, the lower income and lower skilled workers suffer the most from COVID-19. We have not been spared. COVID-19 has also exposed the vulnerabilities of certain segments of our society. The support that the government has provided to households and individuals during this period have helped to cushion the impact. But beyond the immediate support, we can and we will do more to address the stresses and strains brought about by COVID-19. The government will therefore continue to review our social safety nets, paying attention to groups that have been set back during this pandemic. And let me highlight some areas. For those who become unemployed, our current support goes beyond ComCare or the COVID-19 Recovery Grant. It includes a wide range of active labour market policy measures like job matching and skills training opportunities. We will study how we can provide more help for those who lose their jobs, with continued focus on employment facilitation. And the labour movement will continue to be an important partner in these efforts, as Mr. Abdul Samad and many others has also mentioned. We value also the contributions of our caregivers. We introduced a home caregiver grant recently to defray the cost of caregiving expenses. We will continue to see how we can better support our caregivers together with the social infrastructure needed for an aging population. With the rise of the gig economy, we will examine how we can boost protections and strengthen the financial resilience of self-employed persons. This includes support for skills upgrading and transition to regular employment for those who wish to do so. So these are some of the areas that we are now reviewing. But the journey towards building a fairer and more inclusive society goes beyond redistribution and the provision of social assistance. We all have a part to play to ensure social mobility, opportunity, and importantly, dignity for every worker. We must put maximum effort to help every worker earn a fair wage and be accorded due respect for their contributions. And it is with this in mind that the government, unions, and employers have been collaborating closely to raise the wages and enhance the employability of our lower wage workers, as well as to improve their working conditions. The tripartite work group on lower wage workers, chaired by SMS Zaki Muhammad, is looking at how we can move faster to uplift even more workers in a sustainable and meaningful manner. This includes increasing the number of workers covered by the progressive wage model and offering progressive wages in occupations not covered by the mandatory PWMs. The work group will release its recommendations in due course, and we are confident that these will lead to tangible and beneficial outcomes for our lower wage workers. We will also continue to review the Workfare Income Supplement Scheme, which works hand in hand with the progressive wage model to raise the incomes of our lower wage workers. Helping our workers is a continuous endeavor that cannot be accomplished by government efforts alone. We will partner our unions, communities, employers, and the workers themselves to ensure that we continue to protect the livelihoods of the most vulnerable amongst us. COVID-19 has also taken a toll on our mental well-being, and I assure Dr. Tanya Swam, Ms. Jessica Tan, Mr. Melvin Yong, and Ms. Raisa Khan, who spoke on this issue, that the government takes very seriously the issue of mental health for our people. MOH and MSF have set up a new interagency task force which transited from the COVID-19 Mental Wellness Task Force. It is chaired by SMS Janil, and this task force will bring together the capabilities and capacities of different agencies to coordinate and oversee this important effort. Together with our healthcare professionals and social service agencies, we have stepped up efforts and invested significant resources to enhance the mental well-being of Singaporeans, and we will continue to do so. The focus areas include awareness, prevention, destigmatization of mental health issues, and treatment. And we will also take care of the mental well-being of our migrant workers, which is an issue raised by Mr. Louis Ng and Mr. Muhammad Fahmi. For all of these work, the government can only do so much alone. We will need Singaporeans to step forward and contribute your ideas, talents, and energies so that together we can do more to help the disadvantaged and vulnerable in our community. Let us rally together to build a Singapore where we develop the full potential of every citizen, where every person is respected and valued, and no one is left behind. Finally, we will build a greener and more sustainable home. We will put sustainability at the heart of our recovery, as Ms. Mariam Jafar suggested just now. Earlier this year, we launched the Singapore Green Plan 2030. This is our national roadmap for a better and greener future. It sets out ambitious sectoral targets to green our living environment, use cleaner energy sources, and be more resource efficient. Beyond 2030, by 2050, we aim to halve greenhouse gas emissions from our 2030 peak with a view to achieving net zero emissions as soon as viable. As an alternative energy disadvantaged country, this is a very ambitious aspiration to be net zero, but we are working very hard to make it happen. For a start, we are reviewing the carbon tax level post-2023 in consultation with industry to incentivize the shift to green alternatives. We are also investing in new technologies that can help reduce our waste and emissions. And importantly, all of us must do our part by adjusting our consumption patterns and making changes to our everyday lives. The transition will not be easy, and it is not going to be costless. But there are also many opportunities to pursue from a green and sustainable Singapore. Sustainability will be a new growth area because it cuts across different industries. You can have green transport, green buildings, green power, whole range of different new areas to explore. In some areas like renewable power, there will naturally be constraints in how much we can scale up within Singapore. But our firms can export solutions overseas. For example, Sunseap Solar Company is now building the world's largest floating solar farm and energy storage system in Batam. We are also putting in place plans to make Singapore the leading center for green finance in Asia. We can be a hub for the financing of green projects in the region and even worldwide. And we can be a carbon services hub to complement Asia's decarbonization efforts. So it is a difficult transition to make, but there are significant opportunities as well as we enter into the green economy. Building a more vibrant economy, a fairer society, and a greener nation. These are all ambitious long-term goals. It will take significant resources, billions of dollars, to make these plans a reality. And to achieve that, we need a sustainable fiscal strategy. I mentioned the G20 just now, G20 meeting. The G20 consists of the major economies that make up more than 80% of the world's economy, many of the world's advanced economies, all with high per capita GDP and standards of living. But nearly all of them are grappling with annual deficits and rising public debt. And COVID-19 has worsened their fiscal position. Why has this happened? It often starts with good intentions. For example, increased public spending on healthcare or welfare schemes, all with the best of intentions. But before long, entitlement spending balloons sharply as the economy matures and population ages, outpacing the ability to raise revenues to cover these spending obligations. What happens then? The country turns to borrowing to finance its annual deficits year after year, and this ends up quickly in a downward fiscal spiral. What's more worrying is that societal norms and individual expectations change. An entitlement mindset sets in. It becomes politically very challenging to roll back any benefit and to raise taxes or even to mention it. There's a tendency to shortchange the future and to overspend on the present. That's why we must always resist the siren song of easy money. And we must do our part to uphold a culture of fiscal responsibility and stewardship. Our constitutional fiscal rules seek to achieve that by imposing strict discipline on how we go about spending and using our reserves. It's a framework that enables us to safeguard our reserves while achieving a fair and judicious balance between the interests of today and tomorrow. A balance between spending for today's needs and saving for the future needs of today's generations and generations to come. Now, it doesn't mean that the rules can never be changed. I've said that before. But we should do so only after very careful consideration and take measured steps. In fact, We debated and amended the Net Investment Returns or NIR framework not that long ago in 2015. We made a considered long-term decision that balanced the needs of present and future generations. The NIR framework will make a very substantial contribution to the government's annual budget, but it was not meant to cover every funding need. Therefore, we should not, at the first sign of need, push for changes in the rules now just to take the easy way out and avoid having to raise tax revenues to meet our growing recurrent expenditure needs. That would not be the responsible thing to do. As Mr. Liang Eng Hua and Professor Hoon Hian Teck both highlighted, we will have to raise revenues in order to meet our rising expenditure. Rising expenditure for very meritorious reasons, for all the things that we talked about, our economy, a fairer, inclusive society, a greener nation. But in deciding the timing of any tax increases, including a GST rate increase, the government will take into account our fiscal needs as well as the prevailing economic conditions. Mr. Yip Hon Wing and Mr. Louis Chua suggested that maybe the government could consider other taxes instead of GST. The truth of the matter is that we need both. The GST rate increase is largely to fund higher spending in healthcare, especially as our population ages. It reflects the support we aspire to provide for every Singaporean, better healthcare for our elderly and for ourselves as we grow old. And because these are broad-based needs, we should fund them using a broad-based tax like GST. That's appropriate and that's responsible. In fact, even with a 2 percentage point GST increase, we will not be able to cover all our projected healthcare spending needs. As such, we have been increasing other revenue sources over the years, be it income tax, property tax, or buyer's stamp duty, and we will continue to review these and other tax options for the future. I should just make a point of clarification. It's a slightly technical, but Mr. Louis Chua just now mentioned that SMEs contributed 29% of corporate income tax, but accounted for just 9% of accounting profit. So the suggestion is that SMEs pay disproportionately more in tax than non-SMEs, because 29% of corporate income tax, but just 9% of accounting profit. But this comparison is in fact not correct, because firstly, when we look at accounting profits for all companies, it includes profits and losses. It's the bottom line. It's a summation of the bottom line. That's one. Number two, corporate income tax is levied on chargeable income, not accounting profits. And Mr. Louis Chua said, I think you should know accountancy, and that chargeable income is not the same as accounting profits. You have to make tax adjustments, like non-tax deductible expenses like depreciation or capital allowances. So the two concepts are quite different. Only the companies with positive chargeable income need to pay corporate tax. Those with losses can carry forward their losses to offset future years' corporate tax liability. In fact, close to 60% of all SMEs do not pay corporate income tax. And it's quite clear from the data. We've replied this in the PQs as well. It's quite clear from the data that SMEs have a lower tax burden than non-SMEs or the larger companies. The effective tax rate for SMEs is 3%, but the effective tax rate for non-SMEs is 8 to 10%. So there should be no doubt. Our system is such that SMEs have a lower tax burden. Now, going back to GST, some have expressed concerns that the GST is regressive. But again, we cannot look at GST in isolation. Our GST system is unique in that it is tied to a permanent GST voucher scheme where we offset the GST for lower income Singaporeans, and we also absorb GST for publicly subsidized healthcare and education. And as part of the upcoming increase in the GST rate, we have set aside $6 billion for a temporary assurance package to cushion the impact for all Singaporean households, with lower income households to receive more. In addition, we will enhance the permanent GST voucher scheme. So not just the temporary, but the permanent layer to strengthen support for lower to middle income Singaporeans. So concerns about regressivity have been mitigated and will continue to be as we plan for the GST increase. At the same time, remember that our public services and subsidies are designed to provide more help for the lower and middle income. Put together, the outcome is that higher income groups pay more taxes than the benefits they receive, while the lower and middle income groups receive significantly more benefits than the taxes they pay. As I've shared before, lower income households receive close to $4 of benefits for every $1 of tax they contribute. This is how we ensure our taxes and transfers remain fair and progressive, and it will be anchored in a system of sound and sustainable finances. Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, COVID-19 will be a major chapter in our history. It will be remembered as the time when our usually bustling CBD lay empty, when we had to work from home, when we had to meet with our friends and loved ones over a screen. But it will also be remembered as a time we saw the best of Singaporeans amidst adversity and tough conditions. COVID-19 is only one chapter. We have much going for us today and much more we can look forward to in the journey ahead. So let's harness our collective strengths, keep striving to do better, and write many more chapters of our Singapore story together. Thank you.